Osamu Tezuka, god of manga, father of anime, and pioneer of many genres and ideas. If you're a fan of anime and manga, I would hope you're at least vaguely familiar with the name, even if it's just in the context of, oh, he's the guy that made Astro Boy and Kimba. But perhaps you know him for some of his other works like Phoenix or Blackjack or Dororo, or maybe Princess Knight? Among Tezuka's many works and many accolades, Princess Knight stands as one of his most iconic. It's frequently held up as one of the progenitors of action heroines in manga, if not the first shoujo manga ever with a real story. Granted, the definition is a little loose. Its legacy is vast, and it's not hard to see why it's getting a brand new adaptation. It's nice to see Tezuka's shoujo works get discussed, except that's actually the problem. Tezuka's shoujo works aren't really discussed much, at least not in English. Whether it be from a lack of translations or a general audience not really caring about this old guy and his old manga, you'd be hard-pressed to find content talking about Tezuka and the other works he made for a female demographic, save for certain exceptions. But that's where I come in. I may not be well-versed in shoujo manga in general, but I am a bit knowledgeable on Tezuka, knowledgeable enough to make a little video exploring his shoujo works, knowledgeable enough to explore his female leads and writing habits throughout the years. At the time of writing, I've yet to read every Osamu Tezuka manga, and I may not talk about everything I could, given some works of his just aren't easily available, but let's make something educational that no one else is likely to. Let's talk about what kind of characters he wrote, the themes he tackled, and just whatever else I feel like is worth mentioning. Let's go on this little journey together as we take a brief look into the shoujo manga of Osamu Tezuka.
越えてラララ星の彼方行くぞアトムジェットの限り心優しいラララ科学の子みんな限りだ鉄腕アトム
Alright then, where to start? Some might think the obvious place would be the famous 1953 Princess Knight manga, as it was Tezuka's first shoujo manga, but that's actually not entirely true. When we discuss Tezuka's shoujo works, or things aimed at a female demographic, there's some obvious criteria we can use to point them out. If we were to look at the first serialized manga of his published in a shoujo magazine, that would be 53's Princess Knight. But if we were to look at his first work that just mainly features a female lead, or even features a certain trope of his, we can go back even earlier. Now, of course, Tezuka was first published in 1946 with Diary of Machan, a simple comedy-focused newspaper strip. But that's not the first manga of his we have. We've actually got quite a few pre-publication works of his, or at least others have a few in expensive collections I haven't been able to justify buying, so I only have 3. And one of those 3, Old Man's Treasure Island, doesn't have a female lead, but it does have an early appearance of what would become an iconic Tezuka trope. To make a long story short, Tezuka grew up around the theater troupe The Takarazuka Revue. This is an all-female acting troupe that's still active to this day, and while most people would point to something like Disney or American comics in general as the thing that influenced Tezuka, I think you'll find The Takarazuka Revue also had a significant impact on him. He would be greatly inspired by their performances, and this is likely what would lead to Tezuka cross-dressing a bunch of his female characters. The Takarazuka Revue had women playing men's roles, and Tezuka seems to have taken a page or two from them. And while we don't actually get to see this in what survives of Old Man's Treasure Island, the first occurrence may have happened here. The character of Hoshiko finds herself in trouble when her male companion of fake relation, Tsukiko, gets killed by pirates. She then encounters a man in a bat costume who encourages her to let go of her womanly side, become a man, and seek vengeance. Any pages showcasing this seem to have been lost to time, but Tezuka making his women of action probably starts back before he was even published. Trust me, he's gonna do that quite a bit. But that's just the origin of a trope. Let's get into Tezuka's actual first shoujo work. Throughout the 1940s, he mostly spent his time making simple action-adventure stories for boys. There would be the occasional strong female character, like Michi from Dr. Mars, and works with non-gender specific general appeal, like Four Fences of the Forest, a Grimm's fairy tale adaptation. He'd even do some single or double page works for the Takarazuka Review magazine, frequently portraying one of their plays. I think it could even be argued that these could be considered his first shoujo manga, despite being only 1 or 2 pages. But for our purposes, I think we should really begin with 2 1949 manga, Pistol Angel and Tale of the Miracle Forest. Pistol Angel was Tezuka's first western of many. It follows a small Wild West town as they deal with the local native population and a corrupt sheriff, and most importantly, it has 2 protagonists. One of them, a boy named Jim, who's initially hostile to the natives until joining them in fighting the previously mentioned corrupt sheriff, but the other one is Anna. Anna is introduced to us asking the native outlaw monster, yes, that's his name, how to shoot. She's a woman of action who isn't afraid to fight, and who disguises herself as a man to sneak around. By the end of the manga, she's fully capable in her own right, and could maybe even be seen as Tezuka's first real action heroine. It's nothing too complex, but it's a good starting point for some of Tezuka's hallmarks. As for Tale of the Miracle Forest, it also features multiple lead characters. It follows the goddess of a forest who gets upset when a kingdom is chopping down her trees. In response, she disguises a local squirrel as Princess Briar-Rose in order to trick the corrupt duke, disguises the real Princess Briar-Rose as a deer, and the princess's brother named Robin Hood also gets involved in this mess. Between the goddess, the princess, and the squirrel disguised as a princess, a lot of this manga follows female characters. Its art also has times where it's more fanciful and decorative. While much of the manga follows the exploits of Robin Hood, and it feels like this story is really appealing to all demographics, it can't be denied that there is a bit of shoujo leaning to it, at least more than Tezuka is typically writing at this point. Oh yeah, this is also one of, if not the first time Tezuka wrote himself into a story. He's the narrator, and this was early enough in his career that he wasn't drawing himself with his characteristic big nose. There's some trivia for you. Moving into the early 1950s though, we're going to see Tezuka make a whole lot of works that are explicitly shoujo. No more of this sort of stuff. And the first of which may not be what you expected. While just a short little 8-page story, Kaneko the cheerleader primarily follows the girl, Kaneko. The story revolves around her borrowing her brother's cheering outfit for a play she's performing in, her brother's friends then needing to find her and the outfit, and then subbing Kaneko in as a disguised male cheer captain. Once again, we have Tezuka's cross-dressing trope appear, which, for the record, I usually subscribe to a feminist interpretation, but more importantly, we have a primarily female-led manga. As for our next female lead, well, it's a bit trickier. 1951's Fossil Island is more or less an anthology work. It opens with multiple characters, including Tezuka himself, staying the night on an island and having weird dreams which act as the stories. And in one of those dreams, the main character is Kodama, the female poet. Her story is actually one of, if not the most interesting one for me personally. The story goes that Tezuka had recently seen the 1947 film Lady in the Lake, which is shot entirely in first person, so Tezuka tried to make a first person manga. He doesn't keep it up all the way though, but the idea was fun for a bit. As for the story, it has Kodama meet a bunch of fairies and get roped into acting as a love spirit. It's all very romantic. Even if just part of an anthology, Tezuka briefly gives the role protagonist to a female lead, and it's all very shoujo-esque compared to the other stories. But okay, let's get into an actual heavy hitter with a bit more to talk about. Tezuka's most iconic shoujo manga, period. In 1953, Ribbon no Kishi, or Princess Knight, would be released. It follows Princess Sapphire, who is born with both a boy and a girl's heart due to a mix-up in heaven. Or, if it makes more sense to you, a boy and a girl's soul. To prevent the kingdom from falling into the hands of Duke Duralaman, she's had to pretend to be a prince her whole life, while longing to live as a girl. And through a series of events, she'll have a romance with Prince Franz of the neighboring rival kingdom, get involved in the schemes of the wicked Mephisto, who wants to give her girl heart to his daughter Hecate, and protect the throne of Silverland from those who would take it. There's a fair bit that could be said about Princess Knight. As I touched on in the intro, it is credited with, at the very least, popularizing shoujo manga with action heroines and actual developing dramatic stories instead of slice-of-life or comedic ones. Some say it may even have been the first to do the latter, but that's a whole other research topic. But what about the writing? What kind of character is Sapphire? Who is the quintessential Tezuka heroine? Well, for starters, she was modeled after the Takarazuka Review. The women of the troupe playing princely roles is probably what influenced the character the most, and heck, if I'm correct, Sapphire herself was even designed after a particular actress. As for her character in the story, she's known to be a great sword fighter. She sees a lot of combat throughout the manga, as expected of an action heroine, But that's not her only weapon though, as she's also quite crafty. She's intelligent, able to play tricks around Prince Franz and Duke Doralaman. She's brave, willing to face danger for the good of her kingdom, but also kind and generally fun. Despite being a heroic fighter, she also has a girly side and wants to fall in love. She's both prince and princess, and both are important parts of her personality. For a 1950s audience, I imagine she must have been a great role model for the young girls reading about her. Sapphire gives off a message of women are just as capable as men, and I believe Princess Knight stands as a rather feminist work for its time. The boy and girl hearts in the story can be read as societal roles or gender norms. While Sapphire does embrace her feminine side, or girl heart, the manga makes a point of her still being able to fight regardless. Even without her boy heart later in the story, she is still strong. There is a whole discussion of how certain elements have aged and how the modern concept of gender identity fits into this whole thing, but I think those interpretations are more retroactive than intended by Tezuka at the time. Still, Sapphire remains a capable, strong, smart, and kind character. Depending on the reader, they may interpret them as a feminist role model or someone who represents the defiant of gender norms in general. And actually, while I'm here, I'd regret it if I didn't bring up the 63 remake manga specifically. In that version of the story, Hecate, Mephisto's daughter in the original who was more bratty and scheming in the 53 version, gets turned into what could be called an early portrayal of a girl boss. Her whole plotline is how she doesn't want to be womanly and doesn't need no man, and I can see why she's popular among those who've read it. That version also has a second female knight, Freebie, who goes around fighting people in search of a man good enough to beat her. The 63 manga definitely has some proactive women in it. I could go on, but we've got plenty more manga to cover that rarely get the spotlight. Needless to say though, there's a reason Princess Knight is fondly remembered. Onto a less heavy hitter, we've got Scene Penny. It's a short manga following a farm girl, Penny, with aspirations of being a big singer. A misunderstanding ends up starting her career, and she actually manages to become a star, but in the end, she finds she prefers her simple country life. Scene Penny gives us an encouraging story about following your dreams, but also reminds the audience that life is what you make of it, and you don't need to be famous to be happy. Meanwhile, we have not a manga, but a picture book. I'm probably not going to include every one of these I could, but I've at least got to show off the art of the bird collar girl. It's just a short story about a girl who befriends a bird, but look at this art. Look how beautiful it is. And look at the travesty that is the black and white reprints because color is expensive. Actually, if you didn't know, many Tezuka manga had some degree of coloring. Whether that was full-blown color pages or just simple tones, it wasn't uncommon at all. It also feels like Tezuka did some of his best art around this time for his shoujo works. He'd really put in the effort with some of his color pages or covers to make them look beautiful. Am I just using the bird collar girl as an excuse to talk about Tezuka's art? Yes, but I really do feel like he'd put in a little more effort with his shoujo works at times. Our next manga, Queen Nasubi, is a bit more substantial and could be called Tezuka's second big shoujo work. The story opens on three young girls saying goodbye as they graduate from school. There's Takako, Fujiko, and Nasubi. Takako dreams of being a ballet dancer, Fujiko's going on to high school to one day become a teacher, and Nasubi, well, she's going home to the countryside. The three agree to reunite one day and go their separate ways. The manga primarily focuses on Takako and Nasubi, with Fujiko more or less being a supporting character. As for Takako and Nasubi, Takako ends up on the path of ballet through a chance encounter. The manga follows her working hard to achieve her dreams while facing realistic struggles. As for Nasubi, well, she wins the favor of a nature goddess and gets a fox who will grant her a wish. Nasubi wishes to be a queen, and a freak encounter with pirates will result in her being mistaken for a foreign princess and taking her place as royalty once she's rescued. Nasubi will find herself pretending to be the lost princess while government officials try and get rid of her. Queen Nasubi mixes a more grounded realistic story alongside a fantastical one to keep things interesting for the reader. According to his interviews, Tezuka was particularly inspired by the 1953 film The Prisoner of Zenda, hence the character of Zenda, who is also drawn to look like one of the actors, James Mason. What we ended up getting is a manga that depicts all kinds of hardships, both the normal and the abnormal, for our characters to face. And they do face them. While Takako and Nasubi are dealing with different kinds of problems, the manga gives us a story where perseverance and kindness ultimately wins the day. And similar to Scene Penny, we once again have a manga encouraging the reader to follow their dreams, but at the same time, it doesn't present any of the girls' dreams or life goals as above or below the others. Whether you're a star, an academic, or a humble farmer, they're all valid paths through life. Once again, I think Tezuka imparts a pretty good message to his readers here. Following Queen Natsume, we've got a handful of shorter works. Little Robin follows a girl named Ruri. Her brother sailed away one day, never to return, and when she meets a handsome young man named Robin, the two set out to find him. Ruri and Robin will start to develop feelings for each other, until it's revealed Robin isn't exactly human. It's a fairy tale romance about a love that could never be. The Girl by the Dragon Pool, or the Maid of Tatsugafuchi, opens on two princesses, Hakihime and Kikuhime, disguising themselves as men. Their father has fallen ill, and they need to find the crest hidden at the Tatsugafuchi River to not be dethroned and killed. Along the way, they meet a swordsman, who honestly does most of the work in the story, but it turns out the crest guardian is a local girl. Not exactly a story featuring women of action, but it's kind of there. For a change in scenery, Red Snow takes us to Russia. There, we meet a girl named Minya, who's ostracized for being born on a day when red snow fell. She befriends a church boy named Ivan, works her way out to becoming a renowned singer, and ultimately, it's another fairy tale-esque story about the virtues of kindness, even to the unassuming. Meanwhile, the story of Tonkara Valley is, well, in my opinion, it's a little cruel. Like, seriously, what is this premise? Okay, so the manga opens on this squirrel family getting ushered from the forest by this other big buff squirrel. One of them is a child named Jiro, who then gets separated from the rest of their family. He's rescued by a girl named Sanai, who then attracts a hawk by holding Jiro up and ends up temporarily blinded. While her eyes are recovering, she ends up adopting Jiro as a pet. Then there's an earthquake, her house catches fire, and her parents die. Sanai then goes to live with a friend, almost gets kidnapped, ends up lost in the woods, and then Jiro finds his family again and just leaves her. At least Sanai still has her cat and dog? I'm honestly just baffled by the mean premise of this story. I know Tezuka wasn't the type to coddle his readers, but surely Sanai didn't need this combo of sadness. At any rate, the actual plot of Tonkara Valley follows two stories. Jiro gets revenge on the buff squirrel, and part of the plot follows his adventures. Then there's Sanai, who gets adopted by a brutish but kind-hearted hunter. The manga follows her as she lives in the forest, while developers try to build a dam. She gets bullied by the city girls, befriends all the forest animals, and maybe comes across as kind-hearted to a fault. Ultimately, though, I'd say the real message of Tonkara Valley is about its pro-nature stance. Tezuka was a pretty pro-nature person, and there's a decent amount of this manga that shows that off. And yeah, Tonkara Valley doesn't leave me with much else to say beyond that. It's got a cutesy art style, and it's got a female lead, but in terms of it being a shoujo manga, its focus to me is more about protecting the forest and animals. And now, let's briefly mix things up a little bit. First, we have another entry a la the Bird Collar Girl, with a Tezuka illustrated adaptation of Snow White. The story seems to be like you all probably know, but once again, I just like to highlight Tezuka's varied art when I can. He could really illustrate when he wanted to. But on the complete opposite end, we've got an entry I wasn't sure about including, but screw it. I'm here to cover all of Tezuka's works that generally lean towards a female demographic, and I think this fits the definition. With that, I introduce Diary of a Wandering Insect Girl, perhaps Tezuka's second ever adult work after Collapse of the Third Reich, but we don't need to get too into that here. This is a short manga that follows the life of an ant girl who moves to the city. She finds the people strangely deceptive, she gets roped into being a prostitute, she goes on the run from the authorities, and she ends up becoming a suffragette for female bug rights, gets assaulted by the opposition, tries to off herself, and is finally saved by a human trying to do the same. The story ends with both women realizing their struggles aren't so different despite being different species, and walking away with renewed hope and empathy. Tezuka wasn't afraid to get political every now and then, and here we have an early example of that. Diary of a Wandering Insect Girl leaves us with a lesson of empathy and understanding, and maybe a not so subtle message in support of women's rights. Given some of Tezuka's other works around this time also supporting a feminist message, this really isn't that weird for him to write. I wonder if this existence has surprised any of you viewers though. But let's move on to something a bit lighter, a bit more girly. Miss Soyokaze is a classic love story between a boy and a girl. In this manga, there are two villages right next to each other who have had an intense rivalry for ages. In one of the villages lives Soyokaze, a kind-hearted girl who's loved by all, and in the other village is a boy named Santa. After Santa rescues Soyokaze from being harassed, the two of them form a sort of friendship. The rest of the story is rather predictable. As you'd expect, some event happens and the villagers need to put aside their differences, and Soyokaze and Santa, well, they become good friends. I'll elaborate in just a moment. Still, it's actually rare to see Tezuka make a straight romance like this. No sci-fi twists, no fantasy, no secondary story following a more fantastical adventure. Miss Soyokaze is in a way abnormal for how normal it is among Tezuka's list of works. It's also one of the first times Tezuka started doing this with his panels. It's almost a lost art in modern manga, but Tezuka would have times where he went a bit more creative with panels and their layouts. And here, we can see him decorating them like picture frames. He only does it twice, but I still think it's really neat. One of the other things that's neat is Miss Soyokaze is one of the only Tezuka works with a direct sequel. Despite Tezuka making hundreds of manga, it was actually quite rare for him to do this. And so, we've got Miss Sunflower. The manga opens with Soyokaze and Santa still living in the countryside. One day, a visitor comes and requests that Soyokaze come live in the city for a bit. As Soyokaze is the perfectest girl in the world, the man is hoping she can teach some of her femininity to their rowdy niece. Soyokaze agrees to do so with the hope of maybe finding her lost mother while she's there, and Santa will follow after her in a bit. Arriving in the city, Soyokaze meets Hiyuko. She's a rowdy tomboy who gets nicknamed Sunflower for how tall and bright they are. The initial parts of the manga follow the two of them, as Soyokaze teaches Hiyuko how to be more feminine, while Hiyuko in turn teaches Soyokaze not to be a pushover and to stand up for herself. Neither are presented as perfect, and both have something to learn from the other. Eventually, Santa comes to the city, just in time for Soyokaze to get kidnapped, and after that plot point's resolved, Miss Sunflower turns into a bit of a slice-of-life rom-com. Hiyuko finds herself interested in Santa, while Soyokaze wins the affections of another boy. But plot synopsis aside, I think this is a pretty interesting entry into Tezuka Shoujo. In some of his works until now, Tezuka's presented us with a female protagonist who is too perfect. If they have a fault, it's that they're too kind or too trusting, and that gets addressed here. Soyokaze gets into trouble by being too kind and trusting. Even if she's sometimes able to solve the problem by continuing to be so, it can't be denied that there's value in Hiyuko's way of doing things. Both girls are valid in their way of living, but each of them also has room to grow from the other. I also like how Hiyuko is allowed to have both a masculine and a feminine side. She doesn't have to pick between the two. I think this is one of Tezuka's stronger works when it comes to his early shoujo manga. While he'll depict a kind of virtuous role model for his readers, he was also the type to not shy away from harsh realities. He'd write a sad ending from time to time, even in his works for children, because sometimes things don't work out. And with Miss Sunflower, Tezuka depicts the trusting, kind-hearted girl that's not perfect. Sometimes you need to have some attitude, and I think that's a pretty good lesson. And in a way, we can see this continue further in our next manga, Storm Fairy. This one's a bit of a period piece. It opens on a Japanese lord's castle under siege, with his wife escaping the commotion. While fleeing through the forest, she encounters a witch and makes a deal. The witch will use her magics to protect the lord's life, but in return, the face of their daughter will be swapped with that of the witch's daughter. This results in Princess Ruri being born deformed and needing to constantly wear a mask to hide her face. In contrast, Hakube the witch's daughter is beautiful, and perhaps too good-natured to fit in amongst the forest folk. Under her mother's pressure to be more wicked, Hakube steals Ruri's mask one day. She returns it before anyone can see her face, but a corrupt official gets an idea. Since Ruri is always wearing a mask, if her parents were sent away on vacation, it would be easy for someone to impersonate her, and with the help of his scheming daughter, Ruri finds herself an outcast. Storm Fairy follows the dual protagonists as Ruri teams up with the swordsman to find her parents and prove her identity, and Hakube as she realizes the trouble she caused and tries to make up for it. And thankfully, both are fun. Ruri and the swordsman Fushinosuke find themselves as a bit of a comedic duo. For a chunk of the story, he actually thinks she's just crazy and pretending to be royalty. But eventually, a bit of a romance starts to form. But in my opinion, the real star is Hakube. She reminds me a bit of Sapphire in a way. She's kind-hearted, but a bit of a trickster due to her upbringing. She finds herself infiltrating the castle as a servant and causing mayhem. She also disguises herself as a samurai for a couple of fights. While Ruri's character is more the helpless one, who isn't able to do much despite her determination, Hakube is yet another woman of action. She's brave and clever and even self-sacrificing when it comes to doing the right thing. She's not exactly a complex character that gives me a lot to comment on, but she feels like another good role model for the kids reading the manga. Even Ruri could be seen as a bit of one, in a don't give up even when times are hard kind of way. So yeah, Storm Fairy's fun. Probably one of Tezuka's better shoujo manga from this era. But of course, we can't forget to mention one of Tezuka's most iconic works from this era, his life work, Phoenix. Now, without going too deep into it, Tezuka made his first iteration of Phoenix in 1954 as a shonen work. He later rebooted the concept in 1967 to become the version everyone knows and loves, but between those two, there was Phoenix's second run as a 1956 shoujo manga. This consists of the Egypt, Greece, and Rome arcs, bundled together under the title Early Works by some publications. It's quite interesting that Tezuka took the same base concept and rebooted it across demographics like this. Imagine if he tried to make Shonen Princess Knight or Shoujo Astro Boy. There's some elements carried over from the original 54 version of the story, but for now, I'll focus on the 56 iteration as its own thing. The story starts in a segment that doesn't actually matter much at all. We see a bunch of souls making their way through heaven to be reincarnated, and while we're there, we meet the Phoenix. They're being kept in a cage up in heaven, but they want to escape and go down to the earth. With the help of a reincarnated soul, they do, and this doesn't really come up again. It reminds me a little bit of Princess Knight though, which had a similar opening. But then, we find ourselves in Egypt, where we meet Prince Club, who's on the hunt for the Phoenix's blood to cure his dying father, and Daya, a deposed princess now slave, who helps him out. The two form a bond, end up drinking the Phoenix's blood together, and share a sort of romance throughout the ages as they die and come back to life over time. In his interviews, Tezuka said he watched the 1955 and 1956 films Land of the Pharaohs and Helen of Troy, and felt inspired to make a grand romance epic for girls. I'm still not sure why he decided to reuse Phoenix to do this, but he did. What results is something that's quite different from Phoenix proper, but in other ways still very similar. Phoenix is just kind of a little bit of everything like that. Club and Daya find themselves losing their memories whenever they were born, but still connected through an emotional bond with the other. Their love defies death, and while not the most in-depth, I'd say Tezuka succeeds at making an epic historical romance for a young female audience. I mean, aside from the fact that Club and Daya seem to treat each other more as siblings in the later parts of the story. But of course, there's the other protagonist, the Phoenix. In the earlier chapters, the Mother Phoenix from Heaven gives birth to a child who becomes a secondary lead in the story. Named Tyrrell, if I'm getting the right translation, they're actually given a rather feminine and dancer-like depiction, perhaps inspired by the ballet The Firebird, which was one of Phoenix's influences. Unfortunately though, despite how iconic Phoenix's later incarnation would be, this manga doesn't give me much to really say about it. It's got some beautiful panels, sure, but the character of Daya isn't much to talk about. She's another kind and beautiful heroine who gets by with a bit of trickery. She's not a bad character, but her story gets reset every few chapters and we don't really get to know her all that well. It's romantic in a sense, with her connection to Club going beyond death, but they themselves end up a little bland in my opinion. As for Tyrrell, it's implied the years gradually turn her into a willful teen of sorts, but we don't really get to see too much of it. Eventually Phoenix would evolve and give us more interesting romances with more to talk about, but that's a topic for another time. For now, Phoenix's brief stint as a shoujo manga ends up as a perfectly fine epic for its readers, which will eventually inspire a much more impressive legacy. Moving on, we come to the Rainbow Fortress, what Tezuka would describe in his interviews as an attempt to make an Arabian version of Princess Knight. The story follows Mimi, daughter of the boss of the famous 40 Thieves. She herself has a secret identity as the thief Black Cat, but her mother encourages her to give up on her thieving ways and live an honest life. But one day, Mimi discovers a plot against the visiting Prince Harun, who also just so happens to be the owner of the legendary Rainbow Fortress. Said to grant any wish anyone desires, it's no wonder an evil advisor is after it. Mimi and Harun will find themselves involved in the plot for the fortress, as Mimi also tries to convince her dad to give up on being a thief and live honestly. Add in a touch of elements from Sinbad, and you've got the Rainbow Fortress. Tezuka tried to make Arabian Princess Knight, and that's a pretty decent descriptor for the manga. Like Sapphire, Mimi is more of an action heroine, and she jumps between a couple of disguises. I also think it's sweet how the members of her family all care about each other regardless of their opinions on each other's lifestyle. While it's a nice message for their kids to show that a woman can be capable, I also like how it portrays a forgiving family who accepts each other and changes their ways when sincerely asked to. While Rainbow Fortress gives us another fun heroine, let's not undersell its positive message on family. On to something a bit smaller, The Bell Cricket Princess is a children's story with some rather nice illustrations. It follows a greedy king more or less enslaving a cricket girl when she wins a singing competition, and her town rescues her and saves her from captivity. The Devil Who Came to the Dance is a fun one. It takes place during a masquerade ball, where a girl named Lily is shunned. Her mother joined a group of revolutionaries, and now one of them, the new fox, is supposedly coming to steal everyone's jewelry. With everyone wearing masks and unsure of each other's identity, the hunt is on to find the fox. Another short manga with some good art, and another message about family. But now let's get into something a bit less typical of Tezuka by this point in his career. Let's talk about a manga that explores themes of body positivity and inner beauty, The Rag and the Jewel. And okay, technically I don't think this exactly falls under the category of shoujo, and neither does the next work, but I want to talk about them anyways. They're close enough, I'm not stretching the definition too hard. The manga introduces us to two leads, Kinko and Ishiyuki. Kinko is a less attractive woman in a world that prioritizes beauty. She isn't taken seriously, her crush shows no interest in her, and she's even made to take the fall for something at work. Contrasting her is Ishiyuki, who is a famously handsome actor. So handsome that he never really gets any private time, and the constant hounding of fans is straining his relationship with his girlfriend. While Ishiyuki is out driving one day, Kinko is about to throw herself off a cliff. The two get in an accident, and something strange happens. Kinko turns thin and beautiful, while Ishiyuki is made uglier. For some reason, they find that they can switch forms by getting hit by cars, and the manga explores them living their lives and how their appearance changes how people treat them. And yes, they really do switch forms by getting hit by cars. It's really silly, but just go with it. Compared to Tezuka's usual manga at the time, which targeted children, The Rag and the Jewel is more mature, with its characters having more mature problems. Most of the manga follows Kinko as she tries to win the affections of her office crush, while wishing he'd appreciate her despite her looks. The story doesn't treat her as a joke, but as a reflection of reality. Conventionally attractive people are generally treated better by others. Despite being able to transform and get what she wants, Kinko wishes she was just loved for herself. In the end, I think The Rag and the Jewel ends up with a positive message. Through its various stories, it teaches the reader to be less superficial, and Ishiyuki himself actually grows to appreciate not being handsome. The manga may not be perfect, but I think it's a rather interesting work for this part of Tezuka's career. And actually, we get another more mature manga around this time with the female lead, Calabash Kamako. This one's a little odd. It starts with a scientist bringing back a girl from the Arctic who he theorizes may have some kind of special origin. This girl is Kamako and she's super strong, falls in love with people who give her apples, and doesn't really care about societal norms. I think the general reading of Calabash Kamako would be as a comedic work. With Kamako's quirks, she goes around and causes a good deal of trouble. She also has a romantic fling with an actor, making this one of the earlier Tezuka works with such an overt relationship. Kamako herself is also an earlier example of a Tezuka character with curves. In the end though, I don't think this manga ends up doing much with its more intriguing setup. A bit of a letdown if you ask me, but it gives us a strong woman who also has a feminine side. For a short work, Mignon adapts a bit from the story Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. It follows a gypsy named Mignon, who's abused by their boss and gets saved by a guy named Wilhelm. While Mignon is apparently male, they return the favor by substituting for one of Wilhelm's friends during a recital disguised as a beautiful girl. Mignon's boss tries to kill Wilhelm, Mignon saves him, and then the twist is supposed to be that Mignon was a girl the whole time, and apparently they didn't even know? I've briefly talked about this in another video, but I'm not really sure what's going on with the writing here. Maybe it makes more sense in the original story it's based on. The way Tezuka wrote this though, or at least the way the translator is making it look, Mignon supposedly thought they were male, and I guess they just have a really flawed understanding of biology. Kokeshi Detective Agency follows Tezuka as he makes his sixth detective character, and decides this time around, instead of a boy or man, it should be a little girl. Paco is a child who knows no fear. Teaming up with her more cowardly older brother, they'll go on some adventures and solve some of the strange goings-on around town. It's comedic and cute, but that's about it in my opinion. Pink Angel's a bit more fun. It follows a sunset cloud, Pink, who wants to be friends with all the humans she sees from the sky. One day she draws the eye of the rain clouds, brown and sepia, so she goes on the run while using her shape-shifting powers to help any children in trouble she finds. Another likable female lead with a bit of a trickster angle. The manga consists of a few short stories following Pink and her adventures. It's overall decently enjoyable. The Curtain is Still Blue takes us to the theater, where the star performer Chidori just had a panic attack on stage. The cause? The color red. It turns out Chidori has some kind of trauma response linked to the color red, and when another singer seems to be trying to get rid of her, Chidori's younger sister will try her best to protect her. A solid initial setup. I personally mostly remember this one for its slightly absurd premise. How does this girl go about her very public life without seeing the color red? It's a common color. And from red to green, we've got Kujaku shells, or the green pearls. A boy finds himself washed up on an island where he befriends the local princess, Lima. The manga follows their romance, as well as the boy's attempts to bring science to the locals, against the efforts of Lima's brother, the king, and his advisor. It's more of a tragic story, an attempt by Tezuka at making a romance. It also covers the themes of superstition and traditionalism. It would be the first time Tezuka wrote a story about blind beliefs of religion and customs being bad. I think the weirdest part, though, is the fact that the male lead isn't ever named. I swear, I read through it again to be sure. Unless the translator's messing up the text, this guy has no name. What the heck's up with that? Following that, we have Akebono-san, a work I actually think is rather nice. It opens on a ballet where an accidental real dagger in place of a prop causes the death of a dancer. It wasn't unexpected though. She danced using the devil shoes, a pair of red shoes that'll make you the best but promise a tragic end. And on the opposite end are the white angel shoes, which actually seem to make it harder to dance but promise happiness. After the accident, one of the other dancers steals the devil shoes and hides them, where they're accidentally found by the orphan girl Akebono, who looks after her 4 siblings. She's always dreamed of being a ballerina and is overjoyed to find them. A traffic accident causes her to meet a local crime boss, who she reminds of his daughter, but more importantly, Akebono leaves the devil shoes behind with him. When the dancer who initially hit them tries to get them back, she's convinced Akebono was hiding the shoes for herself to become a star. Joining a ballet school, Akebono will instead find herself being gifted the angel shoes, as she practices hard to become a dancer while resisting the temptation of the devil shoes when they reappear. It's a classic story of the tempting shortcut versus putting in effort and doing things the hard and proper way. Nothing too complex, but it's a timeless lesson. Akebono herself is also a rather admirable character. She works her hardest to support her family, and part of her reason for resisting the devil shoes is that becoming a star could mean abandoning them to travel the world. I also like the subplot with the mob boss trying to do right by Akebono as a sort of replacement daughter. All in all, it's nothing too groundbreaking, but Akebono-san is a pretty solid little story. It's also got some pretty nice art and some picturesque panels. Back to shorter works, Saw That the White Peacock opens with some soldiers finding what remains of a comrade after a war. His helmet is being guarded by a white peacock who refuses to part with it, so they send it, along with the helmet, back home to the man's family. We then meet the man's daughter, Yuri, whose dream is to become a pianist. It turns out the peacock dances along to her playing, so the two become performers. Eventually the public decides they just want Yuri to perform, and not the dancing albino peacock, and Song with the White Peacock becomes a story about holding on to your friends, and not throwing them away for personal gain. Meanwhile, Kodama-chan introduces us to a family, consisting of Kodama, her mother, and her photographer father. One day her father gets in an accident and dies, leaving Kodama and her mother all alone. When some strange men from her mother's past start showing up, Kodama will use her love of photography, just like her father, to save the day. Yet again, we have a manga with a general message and theme about family. And keeping up the trend is yet another manga with a familial message. But to be fair, there is a bit more to it this time. Introducing Angel Hill. The manga opens on Princess Luna being exiled from Angel Island to her intended death. She doesn't end up dying though, instead getting rescued by a passing ship. She still manages to get amnesia from the whole affair, and after being sold into slavery, she finds herself employed by the young man Eiji. Luna just so happens to greatly resemble Eiichi's younger sister, Akemi. He hopes that by hiring her as a maid, the two of them can become friends. It turns out their household is rather wealthy, and with that comes a lot of pressure. Eiichi became a ship captain as a way of running away from his parents, while Akemi is given a very strict upbringing. Initially, Akemi is rather hostile towards Luna, but when Luna's would-be killers find out she's still alive, a case of mistaken identity causes Akemi and Eiji to be taken to Angel Island, while Luna must pretend to be Akemi as the father of the house dies and the mother is left without much help. The story of Angel Hill involves a lot of theming around family. Eiji and Akemi have a strained relationship with their parents, who force what they believe is best on them. The villain Pyoma is eventually revealed to have a family-related reason for her actions. Then there's Luna trying to be a good daughter while pretending to be Akemi. I think, ultimately, the message of the manga is about communication. Even when well-intentioned, you can cause harm to the people you care about if you don't listen to what they actually want. Likewise, the manga encourages readers to hold on to their family, and try to make amends even when things are hard. I don't think it's Tezuka's best or more interesting work personally, but I can see why it has some fans. Also, once again, the art can be rather pretty at times. Moving on, Singing Wild Roses is a biographical manga about German pianist Clara Schumann. Tezuka was a fan of classical music, and at times he wrote manga about it. Singing Wild Roses follows Clara's upbringing with a strict father to become a piano prodigy. It goes on to show how she meets her future husband, Robert Schumann, though I'm not entirely sure how historically accurate the manga is as a whole. Its shorter length doesn't give me that much to talk about, but still, it's another story about abusive parents with some rather nice art. Little Yoko's here brings us back to the realm of tomboys. Due to angels granting her pregnant mother's wish for a strong child, Yoko is a bit of a scamp. She's more interested in boy things like guns than girly things. She accidentally makes a name for herself at a television studio, and the manga follows her career as a male actor. Once again, we have Tezuka's Takarazuka influence in full view, as Yoko spends the manga pretending to be a boy. But this time around it's not to hide her feminine side, but to disguise herself against her mother's old rival. Yoko isn't characterized as wrong for being boyish though. By the end of the manga, it's basically celebrated, unless it was for her parents to accept her for who she is. I think that's a nice message we can all agree on. And following it, we have a manga that's less interesting for any of its actual themes, and more for its development. The Spirit of the Wild Rose was started as a Napoleonic War-era romance. It follows the village girl Yuri, as her town is divided by a fence put up by the army. Crossing the fence, or even associating with people from the other side, is met with punishment. Yuri finds herself suddenly an orphan, with her good friend Rami promising they'll get through this together, even when separated. But then, according to interviews, Tezuka's editor told him to make it more like a fairy tale. So, Yuri goes to pick flowers one day under the command of her evil aunt, finds a mysterious child, Sylvia, who might be a lost princess, and then they have their own adventures. It's not a bad manga, but you can see where the change in direction happened, and it's a bit disappointing in my opinion. I rather like the initial premise better. In the end, what we have is another manga about friendship and kindness with some nice art. But now, we get to a bit of an interesting note. So, as we come to what would be around 1963, Tezuka sort of stopped writing shoujo for a while. He more or less wrote the 1963 and 67 iterations of Princess Knight, made the anime for good measure, and then didn't really make more shoujo works, save for a few exceptions. There's maybe 3 or 4 left depending on what you want to count. There's a shoujo decline, as it were. I'm not sure if any specific reason has ever been given, but I'd more or less chalk it up to the changing manga landscape. Towards the late 60s, the Gekiga boom was happening. Manga for older audiences was finally starting to take off, and on top of starting an animation studio and working on this and that, Tezuka was just kind of busy with other things. So even though we're only into the early 60s and Tezuka was making manga until 1989, we've only actually got a few more entries to go. I thought about including some of his adult works that happen to feature female protagonists or major female characters. Heck, I even wrote all their parts, but they kinda stuck out and didn't match the rest of the video. I was really back and forth on it, but in the end, I decided to cut them. I could see myself one day making a video examining Ayako or Book of Human Insects or Barbara, but those will have to happen some other time. So if any of you were wondering if those were going to be included, they were, but ultimately they won't. Leave a comment about how upset you are, and maybe I'll get around to those sooner. Anyways, with that disclaimer out of the way, we come to a bit of a weird entry. Around the early 70s, Tezuka tried to make a sex ed trilogy of sorts. This would consist of Apollo Stan, Yakipachi's Maria, and Marvelous Melmo. All 3 would dive into their own stories while trying to educate the reader about love and biology, but for this video, let's talk a bit more about Marvelous Melmo. Melmo was the work targeting younger readers. It was a short-lived manga and a TV series. It followed a girl named Melmo, who suddenly becomes an orphan when her mom dies in an accident. From heaven, her mother begs to be able to help her daughter through these tough times, and her wish is granted. Since Melmo no longer has a mother to help her or her siblings, she's granted candies that allow her to age up or down and fill the role herself. And so, Marvelous Melmo follows her adventures with the age-changing candies. And, well, the manga and anime diverge a little. The manga mainly features a bunch of short misadventures. Melmo uses the candies on herself or someone else to change their age and solve some kind of problem. But I think the manga was mainly made as a companion to the anime. And the anime, well, the premise is the same. Melmo's mom dies and she gets gifted the candies to help her and her brother out. But where the manga was a bunch of short misadventures, the anime was the project meant to be educational. And so, a lot of Marvelous Melmo has to do with teaching kids about biology. And sometimes it can be a little explicit. Now, I have no grounds to say what the proper way to teach kids about sex ed is. I'm not a teacher. And besides, this was made in the 70s in a different country. I'm too far removed to judge the show in context of its audience, although apparently it said Tezuka didn't get as much backlash for the show as he thought he would. So, let's brush all of that awkwardness aside and just judge the show based on its themes and characters. Melmo herself is presented as kind and maternal, taking care of her siblings in place of their mom. She tries to help people using the candy, but is of course a child and sometimes can be a little irresponsible. She feels a bit like a standard Tezuka protagonist. I wouldn't say there's anything especially notable about Melmo's actual character or the themes of the series itself. Towards the end of the anime, Melmo needs to confront the fact that the magic of the candies is running out and saying goodbye to this connection to her dead mom, but I'd say the show was more concerned about being educational and teaching kids to be good. In terms of its educational merit, I'll leave that to someone more qualified to answer, but as a show for kids, it's standard despite a little bit of weirdness. Back on track with something a bit more normal, we have our second work involving classical music. Rainbow Prelude takes us to Poland in the 1800s. We're introduced to a young man looking for the famous Warsaw Conservatory Music School, only to learn they're a young lady. This is Louise Kordok, impersonating her brother Lune to attend the academy. While there, she meets and befriends Frederick Chopin, who she develops a crush on while having to hide her gender, and the revolutionary Joseph, who's being hunted by the occupying Russian forces. The manga involves these three as they deal with the turbulent politics of the time, and their different forms of patriotism towards their home, Warsaw. Now, I can't really say whether this manga is that historically accurate, but as a period piece romance, I thought it was good. I thought Louise was a fun character. I do wish it was a bit longer though. It goes by pretty fast and some characters and scenes needed more time in my opinion. But with that out of the way, we finally reach our last entry, the last work Tezuka made that is generally agreed to be specifically shoujo. And thankfully, we're going out on a high note as it's time to talk about the iconic Unico. Made as a collaboration with Sanrio, Unico follows its titular unicorn. As a unicorn, he has powerful magic that he can use to help whoever gives him love, but when the goddess Venus grows upset with his owner's psyche, Unico is cursed to always be alone. Because despite being made for children and looking very cute, Unico is surprisingly filled with a lot of sadness. I don't know if this is a common opinion, but I was surprised when I got around to reading this series. Each chapter of Unico follows Unico as he's brought to a new time and place with no memories. He makes a friend, solves their problem, is then kidnapped by the west wind again, and gets their memories erased again. The cycle continues each chapter, all because Venus was upset with Unico's owner. Unico has a more tragic villain backstory than many actual villains do. Doing away with all the cynicism though, I actually think this is quite the enjoyable manga. Each story has Unico meeting someone in trouble and trying his best to help them with his magic. It has themes of friendship, with Unico literally drawing strength from the power of love. It could also be read to have a strong message of selflessness, as Unico never really gets rewarded for his efforts, but he does it all anyways. That's what love is. You could read Unico as an inspiring story about trying your best in hard times, or maybe you could read it and be hopeful that someone you encounter one day will be able to help you with your own troubles, as if we could all use a Unico in our own lives. It's not hard to see why it's gotten several adaptations and even a currently ongoing series, but I'm here to talk about the works Tezuka directly made himself, and with that, we've reached the end. We've done it! That's more or less every Tezuka work that is generally recognized as being made for girls. There are some I could think to include otherwise, but looking at what was specifically published in a magazine for girls or women, I think this just about covers it. And with that, what kind of conclusions can we come to? Throughout his works, we see Tezuka tackle some recurring themes. He'd frequently write feminist messages into his manga. Princess Knight and other similar action heroine series weren't afraid to give women the spotlight and show they could be heroes too. On a similar note, works like Miss Sunflower and Little Yoko seem to show his support of women not needing to hold themselves to feminine standards. They'd say it's okay to be more boyish and brash, and I like to think that was encouraging for some of Tezuka's readers. He'd also tell them to follow their dreams, speak about the value of family and friends, and on occasion remind people that you don't need to be beautiful or a big star to live a happy life. I think from reading Tezuka's shoujo works, you can walk away with a set of positive messages. A bunch of stories encourage you to be yourself, tell you can accomplish your dreams if you work towards them, and remind you that love and friendship can conquer hardship. Sure, they may be generic and typical, but hey, some lessons are timeless. And if there's nothing else to be gained from them, at least Tezuka's shoujo works has some nice art every now and then. I hope you've enjoyed watching. I kinda put this video together in a spur-of-the-moment decision. Maybe you've learned about Tezuka works you never heard of before, or maybe you found new insight into his writing habits. At any rate, I've been a random Tezuka fan, and I hope this video has at least been educational. I'll be back eventually with more Tezuka related content, and I hope to see you next time when I am.